Good evening. This is Dr. Aparna. I am your emotional healing synergist. I'm an Ayurvedic psychotherapist, a passionate infopreneur, edupreneur, medical writer, and a budding YouTuber. In my pursuit to address, promote, and propagate Ayurveda and psychotherapy globally, I come up with discussions every week on Ayurveda, mental health, psychotherapy, and related aspects. So, as you all know, who are who are in tuned to my live sessions, that I am doing a full book synopsis on Thinking Fast and Slow book. So today is the fourth day and continuation, a fourth session on this, and we are yesterday we discussed on most of the topics, some of the heuristics, and today also we are going to discuss the other heuristics. This book is one of my favorite books, and it forces all of us to think, to make right decisions. This book helps us to take right decisions and helps us in better cognition and what system to be used, either system 1 or system 2, as you can see here. So let's get started without wasting time. So yesterday we discussed on uh, you know priming system 1 and system 2, the two systems priming, cognitive ease, associative coherence, confirmation bias, halo effect, and today we are discussing on how judgments happen. That means system 1, judgment is one of the heuristics. That means system 1 relies on its intuition, the basic assessment of what's going on inside and outside the mind. So it is prone to ignore. So what happens is, if you judged intuitively, based on intuition, if you take judgments, if you make judgments, it might it we might not take right judgments, and it is prone to ignore some like variables. So, what happens is, we often fail to accurately calculate sums but rely instead on often unreliable intuitive averages. So, if you have to do a complex mathematic problem, what we do is, we usually rely, instead of getting into accurate calculation, sometimes what we do is we rely instead on unreliable, intuitive averages. Or this could be, that. So this, it is prone to matching. That means we automatically and subconsciously rate the relative merits of a thing by matching dissimilar traits. So, what happens is, we are prone to evaluate a decision without distinguishing which variables are most important. So, this phenomenon is called mental shotgun approach, according to the author. So, these basic assessments can easily replace the hard work system 2 must do to make judgments. So what happens is, shotgun approach always replaces the hard work that system 2 must make to do, judgments, must do to make judgments. So judgment also, here author says that should be made thoroughly after analyzing and evaluating and calculating with, with the help of system 2, not with the help of system 1, based on our intuition or intuitive averages. That is the synopsis. Next heuristic is substitution. So like he's explaining the author is explaining an easier question. That means when confronted with a perplexing problem, with a complex problem, let's presume there is a complex problem or a complex question or a complex decision that has to be made, that has to be taken. So we make life easier for ourselves by answering a substitute simpler question. So for example, we always choose, author is trying to say that instead of answering the complex question, we always the human tendency is to choose or to answer a simpler question or a substitute that question with a simpler question. So how, instead of estimating the probability of a certain complex outcome, humans usually rely on an estimate of another less complex outcome. That means instead of grappling with the mind bending philosophical question, that is, what is happiness, we answer the easiest question: what is my mood right now? So the author, when he even though when he tested when he was experimenting on people, that if they ask complex questions, people tend to substitute that complex questions with easier answers or easier question rather. So even though highly anxious people activate system too often, obsessing and second guessing every decision, see, fear or risk, it is surprising how often system 1 works just fine for them. Maybe some people, author is saying that maybe some people might activate their system too to answer the question, but most of them do not take the time and the effort to activate the system 2. System 1 just works fine for them. So, even chronic worries function effortlessly in many areas of life while system 1 is running in the background. They walk, eat, sleep, breathe, and make choices, make judgments, trust, and engage in enterprises without fear, worry, or anxiety. So why they replace the complex problems with the easier problems? So potential for error, yes, there is a potential for error when we do that, when we do not use system 2 and we are you making use of system 1 instead of system 2, there is always a potential for error. We never get around to answering the harder question. That means we never may go through that effort to answer the harder question. So the next heuristic is, see, please do remember and keep in mind that this is my understanding of the book or the synopsis or the points which I have made after reading the book. So if I have left out any points, or if you feel there are much more to be added to each heuristic, or if you find something more interesting, you can just mention it in the insights in the comment section. That is your key takeaway. You read the book and what you liked about it, you can mention all of those. If I have missed something, you can just add it on in the comment section. So the next heuristic is affect. So how emotions always influence judgment. Author says that our judgment is usually based on the emotion, that people let their likes and dislikes determine their beliefs about the world. That means there is a potential for error if you use your emotions to influence your decisions, your judgment. So the author says we can let our emotional preferences cloud our judgment and either or very or overestimate risks and benefits. So what happens is when emotions influence judgment, we might under or overestimate things. It both can happen. So we have completed the part 1. The part 2 is heuristic and biases. So here the first thing is the law of small numbers. Heuristic 9 here is the law of small numbers. As I already said, the book is divided into 5 parts, so we are into the second part now, heuristics and biases. So here, what is the law of small numbers? That means our brain have a difficult time with statistics. Author says that small samples are more prone to extreme outcomes than the larger samples. That means we tend to lend the outcomes of small samples more credence than the statistics warrant. That means system 1 is impressed with the outcome of small samples, but shouldn't we? So while considering any experiment or any scientific or economic or policy driven decisions, system one what usually it does is it is impressed with the outcome of small samples, because it does not want to get into the huge sample and get into that calculation, get into that average, and take an effort to do that. But the author says this is wrong. But this is what happens. Small samples, author says, that are not representative of large samples. So large samples are more precise. We get more precise answers when we consider large samples. So if we are doing some clinical trials, that it may be random clinical trials, or you know based on output driven or outcome driven, even there he's saying that large samples are more precise. But often what our system one is impressed of is small samples. So we make an error when we intuit rather than compute. When we use intuition rather than computing the issue, computing the numbers. So there is a potential for error. So we make decisions on insufficient data. The author summarizes that usually humans make decisions mostly on insufficient data. This might be good enough for if you hear something, in small numbers. If one or two people say something about a concept, you tend to believe that concept, or you tend to make decisions based on that concept, which is the insufficient data, which is not sufficient enough. So next heuristic is confidence over doubt. So, here system 1 suppresses ambiguity and doubt by constructing coherent stories from mere scraps of data. So, what it does is, the system 1 usually what it does is it suppresses the doubts and ambiguities. How does it do that? We have it has constructed a coherent idea based on the scraps of data, or small amount of data, or small amount of a few stories. But system 2 is our inner skeptic. Whenever we think that whether this decision, or whether what I am believing, whether it is right or wrong, when you start thinking, when you start analyzing, that is when your system 2 is working. So system 2 is our inner skeptic, so weighing those stories, doubting them, and suspending judgment. So what system 2 does is suspends judgment, quick judgments, or emotionally based judgments. But because disbeliefs requires lots of work, system 2 sometimes fails to do its job and allows us to slide into certainty. We have a bias toward believing. So we always system 2, sometimes what happens is this has to be done with more effort and work. So sometimes system 2 fails here. And we are human tendency is always biased towards believing what they hear, you know, without analyzing. So because our brains are pattern recognition devices, we tend to attribute, casualty when none exists. So regularities occur at random. So mostly what happens is, because of system 2 there are irregularities. Regularities are random. So a coin flip of 50 heads in a row seems unnatural, but if one were to flip a coin billions and billions of times, the odds are that 50 heads in a row would eventually happen. When we detect, this is an example, so when we detect what appears to be a rule, we quickly reject the idea that the process is truly random. So attributing, it is easier to attribute them to some intelligent force in the universe. So author advises accept the different outcomes were due to blind luck. So there are many facts in this world to do chance and do not lend themselves to explanations. So here author says that many a times what we do is we accept the different outcomes and we think that is due to luck without analyzing. So there is a potential for error. So there are many facts in this world due to chance and do not lend themselves to explanations. So we always make connections where none exists. We always tend to make connections. Sometimes what we do is we always tend to make connections. We connect things where the connection does not even exist. So sometimes we have to believe that it is a blind luck, sometimes we have to, analyze. But simply making connections where none exist is not what the author suggests or advises. So the next thing is the anchoring effect. Even though we have discussed anchoring effect earlier, we'll discuss it once again. So anchoring effect is, this is the subconscious phenomenon of making incorrect estimates due to previously heard questions. So what is anchoring is, if previously you have heard some quantities or questions, you make a subconscious phenomenon or a subconscious judgment, or making incorrect estimates. So what happens is, if I say the number 10 and ask you to estimate Gandhi's age at death, you will give a lower number than I would have said to you the number 65. If somebody is asking, saying 10 or 12, the clue, 10 or 12, and then asking at what age did Mahatma Gandhi die, then people would give a lower estimate. Maybe it could be 30, 35. But if I ask that, I tell 65, and then, if I ask when did Mahatma Gandhi ji die, then people will presume it is at 60, 68, or 67. So people, an author says that people adjust the sound of their stereo volume according to the previous anchors. So the parent anchor is low decibel, the teenager's anchor is high decibel. So he's just giving an example of decibel. So what parents say, what the other teenagers think in the say in the classroom or in the various places, that affects, that creates an anchoring effect. So what happens is, people feel, even in driving speed as well, people feel 35 mph is fast if they have been driving 10 mph, but slow if they have just got off the freeway doing 65 mph. So the same 35 miles per hour is fast for somebody who is driving 10 miles per hour, it might be slow for somebody who is driving 65 miles per hour. So this is this is the anchoring effect at 35 the previous thing, the 10 or the 65 is giving to that to the present 35. So in the same way, buying a house for 200 k dollars seems high if the asking price was raised from 180k, but the same price is low if it was lowered from 220k. So if a house is to be sold for 200k, if it starts from the price 180k, then that k dollars, it is costlier for people. But if it starts from 220k and if it is lowered to 200k, it seems um cheaper. The same way the malls and the sale operates, they will give the mrp of 1000 rupees and they will tell that they are selling for 500 rupees, so we feel that it is cheaper. Imagine if the same was given as 520 rupees, and there imagine if the same was 498 rupees, and the price was also 500 or 510 rupees. So you will feel that the same 500 rupees for that is costly for you when the mrp says 520 rupees. The same 500 is cheaper for you if the mrp says it is 1000 rupees. So this is a human tendency, so that is called anchoring effect. So next is the science of availability. So what here author says is in the this thing, in the anchoring effect as well, you have to think and analyze with the help of system too, because there is a potential for error here if you react based on the anchoring effect. So the next heuristic is the science of availability. So the availability heuristic, so when asked to estimate numbers, like the frequency of divorces in Hollywood, the number of dangerous plants, or the number of deaths by plane crash, the ease with which we retrieve an answer influences the size of our answer. That means we are prone to give bigger answers to the questions that are easier to retrieve. Usually the author says the availability heuristic is we usually give bigger answers to easier questions, the questions that are easier to retrieve. So, and the answers are easier to retrieve when we have had an emotional and personal experience. So one who got mugged overestimate the frequency of muggings, and exposed to the news about school shootings overestimate the number of gun crimes. So this is called the availability heuristics. We make decisions on the available memory of our brain. So that is also error prone. So when what author says here is the one who one who was exposed, a child if exposed to the news about school shootings may overestimate the number of gun crimes, because he has a previous experience of school shooting. So the person, the child or the person will overestimate the number of gun crimes that actually happen, and the one who does chores at home overestimate the percentage of the housework they do. So when both parties assume they do 70% of the housework, somebody is wrong. So because there's no such thing as 140%. So if you ask a couple and both say that they do 70% of the housework, so somebody should be wrong there, either husband or wife, because there is nothing called as 140%. It should be 100%. If somebody does 70%, the another person is doing only 30%, or it could be vice versa as well. So a person who has experienced a tragedy will overestimate the potential for risk, danger, and a hostile universe. A person untroubled by suffering will underestimate the pending danger. So, a person who has not at all experienced a tragedy will underestimate the danger, while the person who has experienced a tragedy might overestimate the risk, danger. So, when a friend gets cancer or gets a diagnosis of cancer, we get a checkup. When nobody we knew gets cancer, we ignore the risk. So, if a friend or relative gets a diagnosis of the cancer, what you do is the next thing you do is you also go and get the cancer test done. But if the same you hear that the person or the person who you don't know gets cancer, or you are not very close to gets cancer, you ignore the risk of cancer because वो तो मुझे मेरे लिए अनजान है, तो I will not get that cancer. So there is a potential of error, both are wrong. So, potential for error. Actually, you must analyze that am I doing something wrong that I can get cancer, or do I have any symptoms or any signs of the particular cancer? That must be the line of analysis. But if you just analyze that my friend has got the cancer analysis, diagnosis, or my relative, closer relative has got the cancer analysis, so I have to get it checked, so that could be completely wrong. Or ignoring the checkup because the person who got cancer is a nobody to you, that is also a risk. So there might be errors. So under or overestimating the frequency of an event based on ease of retrieval rather than the statistical calculation. So the next heuristic is availability cascades. That means availability, emotion, and risk. So this is the continuation of this. So when news stories pile up, our statistical senses get warped. That means a recent plane crash makes us think air travel is more dangerous than car travel. So if I hear that there was a plane crash, the my mind automatically thinks that air travel is more dangerous than a car travel. So the more we fear for air travel, the more eager news reporters are to sensationalize plane crashes. So what happens is, the more we fear, what happens, the media even more sensationalizes the plane crashes. Oh, plane crash, plane crash. So a negative feedback loop is set in motion. So this builds up a negative feedback for plane travels or air travels. So this is a cascade of fear. So the emotional tail wags the rational dog. We don't think of the rationality behind the plane crash. We only think the emotional tail wags. That means emotionality takes over the rationality. So there is a potential for ever overreacting to minor problems simply because we hear a disproportionate number of negative news stories than the positive ones. So what we do is sometimes we overreact to minor problem and we ignore a major problem. Both will happen simply because we hear a disproportionate number of negative news about the same thing. So what we do is we overreact to a minor problem. That is what here author is trying to explain. We believe more negative news. The human brain tends to believe more negative news than the positive news. So and negative stories are much into stored into the brain than the positive ones. You might have heard 100 stories of plane landing safely, but if you hear one story of plane crash, that will remain in your mind. So that is called availability cascade. So and there are so many more principles that that means heuristics, that needs to be discussed. We will discuss it in next session. So that is it for today. This is the end of our session, and please do mention your key takeaways and what you feel of the session. So thank you, and I'll meet you in the next session. Namaste.